Good morning. Good morning. And a special welcome to you all on this day, which is a unique day in the life of Montreat, in the life of the Presbyterian Church, in the life of the state of North Carolina. My name is John Kirkendall. I am President Emeritus and currently Professor of Religion at Davidson College, which is here in the state of North Carolina. For the last 11 months, there has been on my desk, and more recently in my computer, a file which is simply labeled 4 govs, which brings us to an occasion on which there is a lot more happening than just 4 govs, and a much more formal title for this day and for this event. The title of what we're doing in this hour is The Call to Leadership. 4 North Carolina governors reflect upon faith and vocation. Before we move to the hour with the 4 governors, I want to call your attention to one person in this room without whom this event would not have taken place. And this is the Reverend Hayward Holderness, the minister of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Durham, North Carolina. Hayward, stand up, and I want this crowd to give you a hand. On the 1st of November of last year, I was in a meeting with Hayward Holderness, and he said, I got this plan to get the 4 living governors of North Carolina, all of whom are Presbyterians, in one room at one time, and I wish you'd come and be the moderator for that. And I said, in the usual fashion, oh yeah, not thinking that this day would ever come to pass. But as time has passed and as this thing has come into focus, it's become clear not only to Hayward but to me and to a lot of other folks that these 4 men on the stage with me today are not only willing to come but eager to come to talk with you about things which are closest to their own hearts and lives. Our pattern for today is for me briefly to introduce each of the 4 men on the stage to you, then to move to 2 or 3 questions that I'd like to pose for them for general edification, and then finally to open the floor for questions, primarily questions, if you please, from our student participants who are here in the youth conference. It's my pleasure to introduce to you 4 very wonderful gentlemen. Beginning on my far left, Robert W. Scott, a native of Alamance County, who lives now on a farm in Hallfields where his ancestors settled 250 years ago. Bob Scott is a graduate of North Carolina State University. He served as lieutenant governor of this state before serving as governor from 1969 to 1973. Following his service as governor for 12 years, he was the president of the North Carolina Community College System, and recently he is retired as distinguished professor at North Carolina State University. Bob Scott is the son of W. Carr Scott, who was also a governor of North Carolina and a United States senator. On my far right, James E. Holzhauser, Jr., a native of Watauga County up here in the mountains. He said that he didn't come to Montreat in the summertime because that would be going down to the low country. Jim Holzhauser now practices law in Pinehurst, North Carolina. He is a graduate of Davidson College and the University of North Carolina School of Law. He served in the state legislature for several terms prior to serving as governor of the state from 1973 to 1977. Jim Holzhauser has served on the boards of trustees of Davidson College, Lees-McRae College, St. Andrews College, currently serving, I think, Jim is chair of the St. Andrews Board, all 3 of those Presbyterian church-related institutions, and he's also served on the board of the University of North Carolina. On my immediate left, James G. Martin, born in Savannah, Georgia, grew up in Winnsboro, South Carolina, now a resident of Charlotte and Lake Norman. A graduate of Davidson College, he holds a PhD in chemistry from Princeton University. He taught at Davidson College for several years, organic chemistry, if you please, and also served on the county commissioners of Mecklenburg County before going to the United States House of Representatives, where he served for 6 terms, prior to his service as governor from 1985 to 1993. Jim Martin is the vice president currently of Carolina's healthcare system in Charlotte. He has served on the boards of Wake Forest College and Davidson College, currently serves on the Davidson board. And one little known fact about him is that he once played tuba in the Charlotte Symphony Orchestra. On my immediate right is Governor James B. Hunt, Jr., currently the governor of the state of North Carolina. Born in Greensboro, raised on a farm in Wilson County, studied agricultural education and agricultural economics at North Carolina State University, and also holds a law degree from the Law School of the University of North Carolina. Jim Hunt has been governor of this state, one person said to me, most of his adult life. From 1977 to 1985, and most recently from 1993 to the present. When he's not living in the governor's mansion, he and his family own a beef cattle farm in Rock Ridge, North Carolina. Jim Hunt joins all the other governors here on this stage in a very strong commitment to education in this state, with programs both inherited and initiated by him. And he demonstrates that service, as these others do, in various ways by volunteer service on a weekly basis in the Wake County Public Schools. Now, you will have noticed from my introduction a healthy diversity of our panelists. They're not all from the same place. They didn't all go to the same schools. They did not all follow the same career paths. And only 3 of them are named Jim. There are 2 lawyers, 2 educators, a couple of farmers, a couple, maybe more, maybe less, of golfers, depending upon who you ask. 2 Democrats up here and 2 Republicans, each one of these with his own particular fingerprint, not only personally, but in terms of the sorts of service rendered to this state, both as governor and throughout the rest of their lives. So a genuine diversity of background and likely of opinion on many issues. But also, and this is the reason that we're gathered here today, a remarkable solidarity, not even to say unanimity perhaps in many respects. All of these fine public servants, remarkable men, not simply during their gubernatorial years, but throughout their lives. All 4 of these people committed Christian laymen. All 4 Presbyterians. All 4 ordained elders in the Presbyterian Church. And as we said at the outset, all 4 willing to take time from busy lives to be here today because of their strong faith commitments and because of a conviction that faith and vocation are intimately related, that what you believe has a lot to say about what you do with your life. And all 4 of these men willing to talk with us today about such things. My task, as I said to you at the outset, is to invite them to do so and stay out of the way. I've already said to them that while we do not wish a soliloquy, we are not petitioning for sound bites either, but they're all conscious of the fact that governors, like college presidents, know how to talk. My wife, Missy, once said that anytime anybody tapped on a glass, I'd stand up and start talking about Davidson College. But I'm going to lead off with 3 or 4 questions. All I can do to resist. I'm going to lead off with 3 or 4 questions about faith and vocation, and particularly about the vocation of the ministry. Invite all or any to respond to these as you will, and we're all wired for sound, so I think we can be heard.
Before he does that, I think on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for one of the nicest eulogies we've had in quite some time. That's right.
Place to begin. Each of you is a Presbyterian. Each of you is a dedicated Christian. What is your earliest memory of your interaction with the church?
Well, I lived next door to the church in Winnsboro, South Carolina. My late father, Arthur Martin, was preacher there. Some call him Piggy. And my mother, Mary, was preacher's wife. And so I remember vividly the disciplinary interest that they had. Many of the members of the congregation bragged to me in later years at one of our events. They said they used to have spanking privileges when Bubba and I were growing up. But part of that is because we're next door to the church and across the street from the firehouse where they played a lot of pinochle. And it said that every once in a while some money would change hands over there. So Mama's job was to keep us oriented to the side and not straight ahead. I think that hurt me in later years.
Yeah, before we get started, I would ask you not to put too much credence in John's introduction when you said Jim Holzhauser is on the far right and Bob Scott's on the far left. Yeah, it depends on where you're sitting up here or out there. That's right. I grew up in a typical North Carolina rural community with a church on one corner, a cemetery on the other, the country store on the other, and the country store owner on the fourth corner. And we were the only game in town. The Presbyterian Church was the only one around. Our family has been members, my ancestors have been members of that church since the church was established back in the mid-1700s. But, there are two things I never realized until I got, almost to be a teenager. I didn't realize there was anything other than a Presbyterian or anything other than a Democrat. And I mean, that's just the way it was. And if you were going to come along spiritually in either path, this is the way you had. This is the way you had to go.
Change is in the air.
How about you, James?
Well, Bob said the Presbyterian Church was the only game in town, and in his place, in our place, we didn't have a Presbyterian church. Boone didn't have one there when I was born, and we went over to Blowing Rock every Sunday to the Rumpel Memorial Presbyterian Church, where my dad had grown up, and where the last time our moderator and I were on the platform together, we were at that church celebrating its centennial year. We built our church in Boone when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I still have a vivid recollection of the elders and members of the church constructing the foundation for that church before the contractors came in, trying to save a little money, I think, and carrying a water bucket around so that everybody could get a drink every now and then, and I really felt like I was a participant in the building of that church from then on. And I guess that's my earliest recollection.
Actually, I wasn't born and bred a Presbyterian like a lot of you apparently were. My father's family had been Methodist, and I was christened by a Methodist minister in Guilford County at my grandfather's home. I grew up in my mother's home community in a Free Will Baptist church. And I guess my earliest memories, Dr. Kirkendall, are going to that church. By the way, that was back in the days when they had these heaters inside the church, and I think when we first started at church, the men sat on one side and the women on another side. I can remember hearing talk when I was a little boy of somebody being ridden out of the church on a rail. I never saw it, but I believe it had happened. I remember my Sunday school. I particularly remember Sunday school. Many of us are concerned that we aren't doing enough and the right things about Christian education. I think Sunday school shaped me more than the preaching did. The Bible school, I can remember that so well. I do remember the services. I remember the good preachers and those that weren't so good. Later on, after college, when we had our family and moved back to Wilson, my wife and I chose, as a matter of fact, we chose White Memorial while we were in college, didn't we, sweetie? But anyhow, we chose a Presbyterian church. Now, why did we choose you? Well, we liked the churches and we liked the programs. We particularly liked the ministers. And we liked everything about it. But I want to tell you, people every day are deciding which church they want to be in. and the ministers are important. Later on, I hope to say something about the song service and how I think we need to loosen up a little more in the Presbyterian church. But those are some of my earliest memories.
Thank you. That's good. Now, take a minute, please, in the same vein, and we won't take this to be bragging at all, but say something about your subsequent involvement in the church. What have you done within the life of the church that has great meaning to you during your adult years?
Well, I was thinking that one of my early experiences in the church is with the youth. There were only two things we had in those rural communities. It was the church and the school. And the church provided an opportunity for social function, and also, I wasn't aware of it at the time, for training. And you learn, I learned, to live with your mistakes. To this day, I'll never forget, in leading a youth program on Youth Sunday, I said, let us all remain seated and sing, stand up for Jesus. And, yeah. I mean, you learn to live with your mistakes. But teaching Sunday school and being in Sunday school and later on teaching Sunday school, and one of the toughest classes I ever taught in my life was later on after I became an adult governor. And I was actually I was lieutenant governor at that time, and I was teaching the seniors class, and my mother was in that class. And the issue in the state at that time was liquor by the drink, mixed drinks. And my mother, who is a teetotaler, was a teetotaler if there ever was one, and in the discussion said, well, I think probably we ought to have it. And I nearly fell out. And I still don't understand it to this day. But the camaraderie, the coming together, a closeness, and we still, our age group still gets together occasionally, and it's just something about it. It's a spiritual binding, I think. And the minister of that day, Reverend N.N. Fleming, who was our minister for many years, was a great influence on me, and his wife, who probably maybe even greater influence, because she put the fear of God in us if we squirming around up there on the front seat, and she'd come up there and sit with us, and things of that sort. All are very vivid in my memory, but had no question about it, a serious impact in shaping my values, which stayed with me, of course, up to this day.
It has been an interesting pilgrimage in a way since I finished law school and went back to Boone to start to practice law. I'd started singing in the choir in Boone when I was still in high school and did that right along. Not too well, but it was regular.
Joyful noise.
And taught the high school age Sunday school class during the 60s when we lived in Boone. And then when we went to Raleigh, it was almost a period of non-involvement in a sense, except going down to the First Presbyterian Church in Raleigh every Sunday and seeing Al Edwards get his Scottish brogue into high gear and preaching right at me every Sunday. And since that time, during our time in Southern Pines and Pinehurst, still teaching the Sunday school class a quarter every fall, and been involved in way too many committees, building a new sanctuary and searching for a new preacher and strategic planning for the church and that sort of thing.
I want to testify for these two Jims, and I'm sure other Jim and Bob, probably not to my knowledge, but also service on the boards of church-related colleges is a part of what you do, for which we're grateful. Jim, I saw you write down a note. I want to hear what it is.
Well, I did. Like my colleagues here and many of you, Carolyn and I have taught Sunday school, and we've been on the board of deacons, and we're elders, and sung in the choir and so forth. But we've always tried to be a part of a Sunday school class that was really searching and probing and trying to figure out what our religion requires us to do in the world. It's awfully easy to be lulled and to think everything's going fine because it is for us. We have tried to be involved through our church and with people in our church over the years to try to bring about racial equality and to end discrimination. That isn't talked about much now, but most of us in this room can remember when it was talked about a lot and when people had to stand up, and by the way, we still do. We have felt very strongly about children and education in schools and opening the doors for all the children that God said ought to come unto him, Jesus said. And we have seen these as two particular areas in which our church and our Sunday school class really needed to be involved, and that's been a part of our involvement that has, I think, meant the most to us.
Amen, Brother Hunt. I don't know about you, but I have enjoyed already listening to these fellows talk about their background and what it means to them. In my case, I would divide it up two ways. The greatest benefit to me, aside from learning music, because one way to keep us from learning to play pinochle was to let us go and play the organ and the piano next door in the church. But in the youth conferences, I went to a summer youth camp at a place called Buzzard's Roost Lake. And that's where they had the Presbyterian camp, and that's where I met Dottie McCauley. Now, at that time, she had a crush on my older brother, Bubba. But in later years, we did something about that because I had the opportunity to be lifeguard here at Lake Susan. And one of the things I've shared with Governor Hunt is when you're lifeguard on Lake Susan, you have to go through all the Red Cross instruction, and so you have to get in every day, and it's real cold. But what you learn is that the smart way to save somebody when their life is in trouble is you don't jump in to them and get drowned and frozen. You get in your rowboat and you row it out to them. And that way, see, they can grab onto the transom, and there's no way they're going to sink that boat. You just tow them back in the shallow water. And so Dottie and I began our most serious courting right here in Montreat, and I bet there's several of y'all that had that experience. So that was the best benefit to me. And I would say that what I consider my best contribution that means the most to me is that I, along the way, decided that I was going to learn how to write music and compose music. And I've written several things. One lengthy anthem with a baritone solo in it. I was a tenor, but I had great respect for baritone. And it was performed by the Catawba Valley Choral Society, 150 voices. You don't think to bring the chill up your back is to have your own music performed by such a group. Let me tell you, it truly was. And I also wrote a benediction based on the last lines of the book of Jude. You remember that? Now unto him who is able to keep you from falling, present you spotless before his presence with great joy. To the only wise God, our Savior, be glory and majesty, dominion and power, now and forever. And that was my father's favorite benediction. And he even used it once after stumbling down, and so I had to experience some of yours. But at his funeral, they had 3 choirs from churches that he had served in and had been a member of. And they did that. They performed that at that occasion. It meant a great deal to me. It's very different.
Yes.
If I might just add, I've always said there are 4 things that have shaped my values. And those 4 are obviously my family, and the church and community, and my school, and the teachers. School and the teachers, and the fourth is a few individuals that were really my mentors and I looked up to. But the church and the school and those teachers all became a part of the mix, if you will, that gave rise to the ethics and the values that I have today. Jess Ray, who's here with us today, she came into the adjoining community of ours when she was in the 4th grade, and we went through school together and graduated from high school together. She was Methodist, and we married in the Methodist church, and I thought, okay, we got one more addition to the Presbyterian church and one less Methodist. I'm doing my part, and that was okay, except my sister, who was a Presbyterian, married a Methodist man, and she joined his church. So it was a wash. But the Presbyterian church has within it, I think, the structure and the means by which we can cultivate among the brightest and best of young people through conferences like this, other things, to really enable this country to call upon its brightest and best in terms of leadership. And the church has that responsibility. And I don't know of any church other than Presbyterian, frankly, that gives more emphasis to that. There may be some that equal to it, but I don't know of any more that does it more.
I'd like to say amen, as Jimmy did earlier. I'm pleased to hear you say that. Let me carry on from that into another question that's much on my mind. A matter of increasing concern to a lot of us these days is the need for strong leadership in the life of the church itself. Now, 2 questions. First question is a yes or no. Did any of you ever consider going into the ministry? Yes or no? Yes?
About 15 minutes.
Okay. No?
It's one of these things that crosses your mind at a certain time in your life, and as you start looking at what your talents are and what your best way to serve is involved. Sometimes it leads you another way, but it's something you still look at.
Well, I can say, as probably all of us can, I can tell you that I ran for governor because of what I believe and the impact of the church and the life of Jesus and all that I've learned on me. Now, no, I never thought